There are three universal truths about humans that every species in the Galactic Coalition learns too late. First, they are deceptively fragile-looking. Their bones break easier than Kronar carapace, their skin tears more readily than Velthian hide, and they lack the natural armor that most warrior species are born with. This makes them appear weak, soft, easy to dominate. Second, they are the only species that voluntarily limits their own combat potential. Every human military academy teaches something called restraint and proportional response, concepts so alien that most species don't even have words for them in their languages. A Kronar fights until their enemy stops moving. A Velthian fights until territorial dominance is established. Humans, they fight until the threat is neutralized, then they stop. They actually stop. Third, and most important, when you mistake their restraint for weakness, when you push past the carefully maintained boundaries they've set for everyone's safety, including their own, when you make them abandon that restraint they've spent centuries cultivating, you don't get to complain about what happens next. The Galactic Coalition Fleet Academy learned all three of these truths on a cold station morning, in a training corridor, in the span of 4 seconds. Those 4 seconds would be studied, analyzed, and debated in every military institution across 200 systems for the next decade. Command staff would use the footage in training seminars. Diplomats would reference it in treaty negotiations. Warriors from a dozen species would watch the recording over and over, trying to understand how something so small could move so fast, strike so precisely, and end a fight so completely. But before those 4 seconds could change everything, there were weeks of tension, pride, and the dangerous assumption that humans were just another soft species playing at war. This is the story of how Cadet Sarah Chen taught the galaxy why humans don't start fights, they finish them. The Galactic Coalition Fleet Academy floated in the neutral zone between the Kronar Empire and the Velthian territories, a massive station that housed the future military leaders of 200 species. It was a place where the strong were supposed to prove themselves, where warriors from across the galaxy came to earn their place among the stars. For 300 years it had operated on a simple principle: might makes right, and the strongest species naturally rise to the top. Then humanity joined the coalition. Sarah Chen stood in front of her assigned quarters on Deck 7, staring at the door panel that someone had covered in what she could only assume were insults. She couldn't read Kronar's script, but the crude drawing next to the words made the message clear enough. She was 5'4", weighed maybe 130 pounds, and according to every species she'd encountered so far, looked like she'd snap in a strong breeze. She pressed her palm to the scanner and the door slid open. Inside, her roommate, a Velthian named Kessa, was doing inverted push-ups against the wall. Velthians were reptilian, built low to the ground with powerful limbs and a ridge of protective scales running down their spines. Kessa dropped to the floor and turned her wedge-shaped head towards Sarah. "They've marked your door again," Kessa said. Her translator rendered her hissing speech into flat, mechanical English. "I noticed." Sarah dropped her training pack on her bunk. Weak blood. The usual. Kessa's tongue flicked out, tasting the air. "Vortan put it there. I saw him." Vortan. Of course, the Kronar cadet had made it his personal mission to make Sarah's life miserable since she'd arrived at the academy 6 weeks ago. Kronars were 8 feet of armored muscle, with 4 arms and a disposition that made Earth's honey badgers look cuddly. Their species had been warriors for 10,000 years, and they didn't appreciate a human, especially a female human, taking up a slot at the academy. "I'll deal with it," Sarah said. Kessa's eyes, which could see into the infrared spectrum, studied Sarah with what might have been concern. "You cannot fight him, Sarah. He outweighs you by 400 pounds. His carapace would break your hands if you struck him."
"I know."
Sarah started unpacking her training gear. "That's why I'm not going to fight him. Then what will you do? Outlast him." Sarah pulled out her hand wraps, the knuckles stained with dried blood from that morning's training session. "He'll get bored eventually." But Kessa's eyes dimmed, a Velthian expression of doubt. Kronars do not get bored of dominance displays. It is how they establish hierarchy. If you do not challenge him, he will only push harder. Sarah knew Kessa was right, but she also knew what would happen if she challenged Vortan directly. She'd seen it happen to 2 other cadets already. The Kronar would make a public spectacle of it, and she'd end up in the medical bay for a week. The Academy's rules allowed for training disputes to be settled through combat, but those rules were written by species who could take a beating and walk away. Humans were tougher than they looked, but they weren't indestructible. She finished unpacking and headed to the training complex. Her combat instructor, a grizzled Velthian named Shrek, had scheduled extra sessions for her. Unlike most of the staff, Shrek actually seemed interested in what humans could do, rather than what they couldn't. The training complex was a massive space filled with equipment designed for 12 different species. Gravity plates could be adjusted by zone, atmosphere could be modified, and the sparring rings were made of materials that could withstand everything from Kronar wrestling to Gestian aerial combat. Shrek was waiting in Ring 3, his scales dark with age and scored with scars from a long military career. He watched Sarah approach with those unblinking reptilian eyes. "You are late," he said. "By 30 seconds. Sorry, sir. 30 seconds is long enough to die in combat." But his tone wasn't harsh. "Show me your forms." Sarah moved through the kata he'd been teaching her, a style that combined elements from half a dozen human martial arts with techniques adapted for fighting larger opponents. Shrek had been fascinated by human combat systems when he'd reviewed her admission files. Most species fought instinctively, relying on natural weapons and size. Humans had turned fighting into a science, developing hundreds of distinct styles over thousands of years. "Good. Your balance has improved." Shrek circled her, examining her stance. "But you are still thinking like prey. You move to avoid damage rather than to create opportunity." "Sir, I weigh 130. Everything here outweighs me by at least 200 pounds. Avoiding damage seems like a good strategy. And that is why you will fail." Shrek's tail lashed. "You cannot win by avoiding. You must find the advantage your species possesses and exploit it mercilessly." Sarah stopped mid-form. "What advantage? We're weaker, slower, and we don't have natural weapons." "You are not slower." Shrek moved to the equipment wall and pulled down what looked like a reaction timer, a device used to test neural response speed. "When I first saw human combat footage, I thought it was accelerated. I thought no species could move that quickly through a complex sequence. Then I tested it." He handed her the device. It would flash lights in random patterns, and she had to hit the corresponding buttons as quickly as possible. Sarah had done this test during her entrance evaluation. She'd scored well, but she hadn't thought much of it. "Do it," Shrek ordered. Sarah activated the device. Lights flashed in rapid sequence. Red, blue, green, yellow, red, blue. Her fingers moved automatically, hitting each button as it lit. The sequence got faster. Her hands became a blur. After 30 seconds, the device chimed completion. Shrek took it from her and showed her the display. Average response time, 0.15 seconds. "Do you know what the average Kronar scores?" Sarah shook her head. 0.4 seconds. Velthian, 0.35. Gestian, 0.28. Shrek's tongue flicked. "Your species has the fastest neural response time of any in the Coalition. Your brains process and react to threats nearly 3 times faster than a Kronar's. Do you understand what this means?" She'd never thought about it that way. Humans moved fast because they thought fast. Every childhood reflex game, every sport that required quick reactions, every combat system that emphasized speed over power, it was all taking advantage of something most humans didn't even know was exceptional. "It means I can hit him 3 times before he can hit me once," Sarah said slowly. "If you are skilled enough, yes. But speed without precision is useless. Speed without strategy is suicide." Shrek moved to the center of the ring. "Attack me!" Full speed. Do not hold back. Sarah had learned not to question Shrek's instructions. She launched forward, throwing a quick jab at his center mass, then ducking under where his counterattack would come from. But Shrek was faster than most Velthians, and his clawed hand swept past where her head had been a split second earlier. She pivoted, drove a low kick into his leading leg, felt the impact shudder through her shin. Velthian scales were tough, but the joint beneath was vulnerable. Shrek grunted and shifted his weight. She pressed, throwing a combination jab, cross, hook, aimed at the gaps in his natural armor. Shrek's tail whipped around, forcing her to leap back. "Better!" "You are beginning to see the openings, but you telegraph your intentions. Your shoulders tense before you strike." They drilled for another hour, Shrek pointing out every wasted movement, every predictable pattern. By the end, Sarah's muscles burned and her knuckles were bleeding through her wraps again. But something had shifted in her understanding. She wasn't trying to match strength with strength anymore. She was finding the spaces between, The moments where speed and precision could overcome raw power. As she was leaving the training complex, she nearly collided with Vortan in the corridor. The massive Kronar filled the passage, forcing her to press against the wall. His forearms flexed as he loomed over her, mandibles clicking in what might have been amusement. "Watch where you walk, soft skin," he rumbled. His translator made his voice sound like grinding stones. Sarah kept her eyes level, not meeting his gaze directly. That would be a challenge, but not looking down either. That would be submission. "The corridor's wide enough for both of us, Cadet Vortan. Not when you are in my way."
One of his hands shoved her shoulder, slamming her into the wall.
Not hard enough to injure, but hard enough to make his point. Several other cadets had stopped to watch. "You do not belong here. Your species is too weak for war." Sarah felt the anger rising, but kept her voice level. "I passed the same entrance requirements you did, because the Coalition weakened the standards to let your kind in." Another shove. Harder this time. "You will wash out within the month, or perhaps you will have an accident in training. Either way, you will not graduate." Every instinct Sarah had learned in 12 years of martial arts training told her to drop her weight, shift her stance, and strike at the vulnerable points she'd been studying all afternoon. She could see them clearly now. The joint gaps in his carapace, the softer tissue around his mandibles, the nerve cluster at the base of his thick neck. 3 strikes, maybe 4, placed precisely in those spots with all her speed. But she also saw the other cadets watching, saw the expectations in their eyes. They wanted her to fight back. They wanted to see if the human would finally prove she belonged, or prove she was just another weak species playing at war. Sarah forced herself to relax. "I'm not going to fight you, Vortan." His mandibles clicked rapidly, a sound of disgust. "Of course not. You're a coward like all your kind." "Maybe." Sarah pushed away from the wall, moving carefully around him. "Or maybe I just don't feel like ending up on report for my 6th week. Or maybe," Orton called after her, his voice carrying down the corridor, "you know you would lose." Sarah kept walking, her hands clenched at her sides. Behind her, she heard the other cadets laughing, heard Vorton's rumbling satisfaction. Kessa had been right. Ignoring him was only making it worse. The Kronar saw her restraint as weakness, and in his culture, weakness invited attack. Back in her quarters, Sarah stood under the shower, adjusted for human comfort levels, which most species found uncomfortably hot, and let the water wash away the training sweat and the shame of backing down. She wasn't a coward. She'd been fighting since she was 6 years old, had earned her black belt in 3 different disciplines by the time she was 16, had competed at national levels, but all of that meant nothing here. Here, she was just a soft skin who didn't fight back. She thought about her grandmother who'd served in the first human military unit to work with coalition forces. Her grandmother had told her stories about those early days when humans were the new kids and everyone assumed they'd be support staff at best. Her grandmother had said the key was to never give them what they expected. If they expected weakness, show strength. If they expected aggression, show patience. If they expected surrender, show steel. But what happened when patience looked like cowardice? What happened when restraint looked like fear? Sarah dried off and found Kessa waiting in the main room, her scales showing an anxious pattern of colors. "I heard what happened in the corridor." "Everyone has heard. Let me guess. They're saying I'm afraid of him. They are saying you are wise not to challenge him, but also that you are weak." Kessa's tongue flicked. "It is confusing to them. To us." "Why do you not fight?" Sarah sat on her bunk, wrapping her knuckles with fresh bandages. "Because I'm not sure I could stop." "Where is it ever just in time?" Kessa tilted her head, confused. "Humans are taught from childhood to control our violent impulses," Sarah explained. "We're predators, Kessa. We hunted prey for millions of years before we learned to grow food. We fought each other for territory, resources, mates. We're really, really good at violence. That's why we're taught restraint. That's why every combat system we develop includes rules about when to stop, how much force is appropriate, what targets are forbidden." "This is madness," Kessa hissed. "You handicap yourselves? We protect each other. And everyone else." Sarah met Kessa's eyes. "If I fight Vortan without restraint, if I let myself do what my training and my instincts want me to do, I won't just win the fight. I'll hurt him badly enough that he might not recover. And then what? I get expelled, maybe face charges, and prove to everyone that humans are dangerous and shouldn't be trusted. But if you do nothing, I know. He'll keep pushing until something breaks. Sarah finished bandaging her hands. I just have to hope I can control what breaks when that happens. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She kept replaying the corridor confrontation, kept seeing Vortan's smug satisfaction, kept hearing the other cadets' laughter. She'd spent 6 weeks proving herself in training scores, tactical simulations, academic exams. She'd scored in the top 15% of her class in everything except physical combat trials, where her size was a genuine disadvantage. None of it mattered if she was seen as weak. She thought about tomorrow's training schedule. Hand-to-hand combat drills, mixed species groups. She'd be paired with larger cadets expected to demonstrate techniques that worked regardless of size difference. She'd have to let them throw her, pin her, demonstrate their superiority while she showed proper form in escaping. And Vortan would be there, watching, probably volunteering to be her practice partner so he could rough her up legally. Sarah stared at the ceiling of her quarters, at the faint glow of the station's running lights through the viewport. Somewhere on this station, Vortan was probably sleeping soundly, satisfied with his dominance display. He had no idea what he was pushing toward. He'd grown up in a culture where might made right, where the strong took what they wanted and the weak accepted their place. He'd never met anyone who'd been taught to be dangerous and chose not to be. He'd never understood the difference between can't fight and won't fight, but he was about to learn. The next morning started like any other. Sarah arrived at the training complex early, went through her warm-up routine, and tried to ignore the stares from the other cadets. Word had spread about yesterday's corridor incident, and the consensus seemed to be that the human was all bark and no bite. Even some of the cadets who'd been friendly before kept their distance now. Weakness was contagious in a place like this. Commander Thex, a four-armed Justian who oversaw combat training, called the class to attention. His species were known for their aerial combat prowess, with hollow bones and powerful wing membranes that folded against their backs. He surveyed the assembled cadets with compound eyes that could track movement in multiple directions simultaneously. Today we practice close-quarters combat against multiple opponents, Thex announced, his translator rendering his clicking speech into Coalition Standard. You will work in teams of 3, 1 defender, 2 attackers. Defender must maintain position in the circle for 60 seconds while attackers attempt to force them out. Attackers may use any techniques taught in this academy. She knew what was coming even before Thex called out the team assignments. Chen, you are defender for the first round. Vortan and Kress, you are attackers. Kress was another Kronar, slightly smaller than Vortan but still massive by human standards. The two of them together represented over 900 pounds of armored muscle. Sarah represented 130 pounds of increasingly anxious human. She stepped into the circle marked on the training mat, adjusting her stance. The circle was 10 feet in diameter, standard for these drills, 60 seconds. She just had to survive for 60 seconds. Vortan entered the circle with Kress, both of them radiating confidence. The other cadets formed a perimeter around them, eager to watch. Sarah could see it in their eyes. They expected a show. They expected the human to be tossed around like a toy, to be humiliated, possibly hurt. Begin, Thex commanded. Vortan didn't rush in. He was smarter than that. He and Kress split up, circling from opposite sides, forcing Sarah to keep turning to watch them both. They were boxing her in, making her divide her attention. Classic pack predator tactics. Kress moved first, lunging forward with all 4 arms reaching to grapple. Sarah dropped low, letting his momentum carry him over her, then rolled away before Vortan could capitalize on her position. But Kress recovered faster than she'd expected, his carapace scraping against the mat as he pivoted. 20 seconds down. 40 to go. They came together this time, synchronized. Sarah couldn't avoid both of them in the limited space. Kress's lower arms caught her waist while Vortan grabbed her shoulder. They lifted her bodily, intending to throw her out of the circle. Sarah did something they didn't expect. Instead of fighting the lift, she used it. She planted her feet against Vortan's chest and pushed hard, driving herself backward out of their grip. She landed in a roll and came up near the circle's edge, but still inside. 30 seconds. Clever soft skin, Vortan rumbled. But you cannot avoid us forever. He was right. In a confined space against 2 opponents who outweighed her combined, there was no winning strategy. She could delay, but eventually they'd wear her down and force her out. That was the point of the exercise. to teach defenders that sometimes the best option was to break through and escape rather than hold ground. But Sarah wasn't thinking about the lesson plan anymore. She was thinking about 6 weeks of insults, vandalized doors, whispered comments, and constant pressure to quit. She was thinking about every time she'd walked away, every time she'd shown restraint, every time she'd proved she was the bigger person by refusing to engage. And she was thinking about how tired she was of being the bigger person. Cress rushed her again. This time, instead of evading, Sarah stepped into the attack. She drove her shoulder into the gap between his chest plates where the carapace was thinner, using his own momentum against him. Her elbow came up fast, catching him under the mandible where Shrek had taught her the nerve cluster was. Cress made a sound like grinding gears and stumbled. 40 seconds. Vortan saw his partner falter and charged, all 4 arms reaching to grab her. Sarah waited until the last possible moment, then dropped flat to the mat. Vortan's momentum carried him over her, and she kicked up as he passed, both feet driving into his lower back where the carapace segments met. Vortan crashed into Cress, and both Kronars went down in a tangle of limbs. 50 seconds. Sarah scrambled back to the center of the circle, breathing hard. The other cadets were silent now, watching with new interest. A human had just put 2 Kronars on the mat. It might have been luck, but it had happened. Vortan pushed himself up, his mandibles clicking rapidly. His species didn't show emotion the way humans did, but Sarah had learned to read the signs. He was angry now. Not just the casual dominance anger from before, but genuine rage. She'd embarrassed him in front of the entire training group. "Time," Commander Fex called. "Defender successfully maintained position." Vortan didn't leave the circle. "We go again. The exercise is complete, Cadet Vortan. I demand another round." Vortan's 4 hands clenched into fists. The soft skin got lucky. "I will prove it." Thex's compound eyes swiveled towards Sarah. "Defender, do you accept another round?" The smart move was to take the win and walk away, but something in Vortan's voice, the absolute certainty that she didn't deserve what she'd just accomplished, made her jaw clench. "Yes, sir." Cress shook his head and stepped out of the circle, his mandibles still moving funny from where she'd struck him. "I am done. Let Vortan prove whatever he needs to prove alone." "This is a team exercise," Thex began, but Vortan interrupted. "I do not need help to defeat a human." The training complex went absolutely silent. Challenging a fellow cadet to single combat during a team exercise was against protocol. It was the kind of thing that could get you disciplined. But Thex seemed curious about what would happen, and no one else was volunteering to stop it. "Very well," Thex said slowly. "Single combat. Same rules. 60 seconds. Begin." This time Vortan didn't circle or strategize. He came straight at Sarah, all 4 arms reaching, his full weight behind the charge. There was no technique to it, just pure, overwhelming force. Sarah couldn't avoid him in the circle. She didn't try. Instead, she moved toward him, getting inside his reach before he could adjust. Her hands found the gaps she'd been studying with Shrek, the vulnerable points in his carapace. She struck 3 times in rapid succession. Nerve clusters at the base of his neck, the soft tissue behind his lower arms, the joint where his leg met his torso. Each strike was precise, using all the speed her human nervous system could generate. Vortan's brain was still processing the first hit when the third one landed. His legs buckled. He didn't fall completely, but he swayed, confused by the sudden signals of pain from multiple nerve clusters at once. Sarah stepped back, resetting her stance. 15 seconds had passed. Vortan roared. It was a sound that made the station walls vibrate, a challenge cry that his species used in ancient warfare. He lunged again, faster this time, rage overriding pain. Sarah ducked under his reaching arms, pivoted, and drove her heel into the back of his knee joint. Kronars had reversed knees, an evolutionary adaptation for their planet's high gravity. The joint was strong, but inflexible. Her kick hyperextended it. Vortan went down on one knee. His upper arm swept around, trying to catch her, but she'd already moved. Her knee came up, catching him under the mandibles where Cress had been vulnerable. 30 seconds. The other cadets were shouting now, a mix of species making a mix of sounds. Some were cheering, some were angry. All were shocked. A human was winning a hand-to-hand fight against a Kronar warrior. Vortan pushed himself up despite the damage. Sarah could see him struggling, his neural response time slowed by the pain signals. He was hurt, genuinely hurt. in a way that Kronars rarely experienced. Their carapace protected them from most damage, but Sarah had spent weeks learning where that protection failed. "Stay down," Sarah said quietly. "Just stay down, Vortan." It wasn't in their nature. He charged again, slower now, his damaged leg affecting his balance. Sarah had a choice. She could evade, run out the clock, take the win. Or she could end it. She thought about her grandmother's words. Show them what humans are capable of. Don't give them what they expect. She met his charge head on. Her first strike hit the nerve cluster at his shoulder, numbing his upper left arm. Her second hit the soft tissue around his mandibles, snapping his head back. Her third hit the solar plexus equivalent, where his breathing spiracles clustered. Vortan's breath wheezed out, his massive body reacting to impacts it had never been trained to absorb. Sarah stepped past him as he fell, staying inside the circle. 60 seconds. Commander Thex's translator emitted a sound she'd never heard before. Something like surprise mixed with approval. Time. Defender wins. Vortan lay on the mat, his breathing labored, his carapace intact but his nervous system overwhelmed. Medical staff rushed forward to check him. He wasn't seriously injured, but he'd been hurt badly enough that he wouldn't be training for several days. Sarah stood in the center of the circle, her hands shaking from adrenaline, her heart pounding. She'd won. She'd actually won. Against a species that had been warriors for 10,000 years, using nothing but speed, precision, and knowledge. The other cadets were staring at her with new expressions. Not mockery, not pity. Something closer to respect, mixed with caution. They'd just seen something that challenged everything they understood about human fragility. Kessa pushed through the crowd, her scales bright with excitement. "Sarah, that was incredible! I have never seen a Kronar taken down so quickly." But Sarah wasn't feeling victorious. She was looking at Vortan being helped to his feet by the medical staff, seeing the confusion in his body language. He'd attacked someone he genuinely believed was weaker, expected an easy victory, and instead found himself beaten by something he didn't understand. Commander Thex approached her, his wing membranes rustling with interest. "Chen, you will come to my office after training." "Yes, sir." She'd won the fight, but winning wasn't always enough. She'd hurt a fellow cadet badly enough to require medical attention. She'd escalated a training exercise into something more serious. There would be consequences. The rest of the training session passed in a blur. The other cadets gave her space, some nodding respectfully, others watching warily. News was already spreading through the station's communication channels. A human cadet had defeated a Kronar in single combat. The details would vary in the telling, but the core fact remained. After training, Sarah reported to Commander Thex's office. The Gestian was reviewing footage of the fight on a holographic display, watching it from multiple angles. He gestured for her to enter. "Sit, Cadet Chen." Sarah sat, her muscles still sore from the fight. On the display, she watched herself strike Vortan over and over, her movements faster than the Kronar could track, each hit placed with surgical precision. "Where did you learn to fight like that?" Thex asked. "Earth, sir. Multiple disciplines. My grandmother was military, and she started training me young. I have reviewed Earth combat systems. They are fascinating. Hundreds of distinct styles, each optimized for different scenarios. Most species develop one or two methods and consider themselves done." Thex paused the footage on a frame showing Sarah's third strike sequence. "But I did not realize how fast you actually were until I watched this at quarter speed." On the slowed footage, Sarah could see what Thex meant. From Vortan's perspective, she must have been a blur. His arms were still moving to defend against her first strike when her third landed. His brain simply couldn't process information quickly enough to counter her. "Cadet Vortan has filed a complaint," Thex continued. "He claims you used illegal techniques and deliberately injured him." "Sir, I used only techniques taught in your own classes. Shrek has been helping me adapt them for my size disadvantage. I know. I reviewed your training logs." Thex opened another window, showing Sarah's practice sessions with Shrek. "Shrek has noted in his reports that you show exceptional promise in precision striking. He also noted concerns about your restraint thresholds." "Sir? He believes that if you were pushed too far, you might cause serious injury before you realized what you had done. Was he correct?" Sarah thought about those 4 seconds in the circle, about how her training had taken over, about how easy it would have been to hit harder, to break bones instead of bruising tissue, to inflict permanent damage instead of temporary pain. I was in control, sir. I knew exactly how hard I was hitting. Vortan will recover fully within a few days. That is what medical says, yes. Thex's compound eyes studied her, but that is not what I asked. If he had not fallen when he did, would you have been able to stop? Sarah met his gaze directly. I don't know, sir, honestly. The answer hung in the air between them. Thex made a sound like clicking stones, a gesture and expression of consideration. The complaint will be dismissed. The footage clearly shows that Vortan initiated the challenge and ignored your verbal warning to stay down. You used reasonable force to defend your position during an approved training exercise. Thex closed the windows, leaving only Sarah's personnel file visible. However, you are now on notice, Cadet Chen. The other species at this academy need to respect human capabilities, but they also need to trust that you can control those capabilities. Do you understand? Yes, sir. You will also receive an official commendation for your performance. Defeating a Kronar in single combat is noteworthy for any species, but for a human, given your size disparity, it is exceptional. This will be included in your permanent record. Sarah blinked. A commendation? She'd been expecting a reprimand at minimum. Sir, I don't understand. This academy trains warriors, Chen. What you demonstrated today was exactly what we want to see. Skill, control, and the ability to overcome a significant disadvantage through technique and intelligence. The fact that you did it without seriously injuring Vortan shows more restraint than most species would have managed. Thex's mandibles clicked. Dismissed, Cadet. Sarah stood and saluted. As she reached the door, Thex spoke again. One more thing, Chen. Vortan's species respects strength above all else. You have earned his respect today, even if he does not yet realize it. But be cautious. Respect and resentment often walk together among the Kronars. Tara nodded and left the office, her mind spinning. She'd won the fight, earned a commendation, and avoided discipline. It should have felt like a victory. But Thex's warning echoed in her head. Respect and resentment often walk together. She had a feeling this wasn't over. The station's gossip network moved faster than light speed. By evening meal, everyone knew about the fight. By morning, the story had evolved into legend. A human cadet, barely over 5 feet tall, had defeated one of the largest Kronars in the academy in under 60 seconds. The details changed with each telling, but the core truth remained unchanged. Sarah found herself at the center of attention she didn't want. Cadets from a dozen species approached her in corridors, some offering congratulations, others asking for training advice, a few issuing subtle challenges. She declined all of them politely and tried to focus on her studies. But 3 days later, the real confrontation came. Sarah was alone in the equipment storage area, returning practice gear after a solo session with Shrek. The storage area was on a lower deck, away from the main training complex, and few cadets used it outside of peak hours. She was cataloging gear when she heard the heavy footsteps behind her. Vortan stood in the doorway, blocking the only exit. His carapace still showed bruising from their fight, dark patches where her strikes had damaged the tissue beneath the armor. He was alone, which was unusual. Kronars typically moved in groups, using pack dynamics even in modern military settings. Sarah set down the equipment carefully and turned to face him, keeping her breathing steady. The storage area was cramped, full of obstacles that would hinder his movement more than hers. If he attacked, she'd have options, but she'd also have nowhere to run. Cadet Vortan, she said formally. Can I help you? He stepped into the room, and the door slid shut behind him. The lighting was dim, designed for Velthian eyesight rather than human vision. Sarah's pupils dilated, adjusting to the lower light, while Vortan's species standard vision had no such problem. You humiliated me, Vortan said. His translator rendered his voice lower than usual, almost a growl. In front of the entire training group, you made me look weak. You challenged me. I defended myself. Sarah kept her hands loose at her sides, ready but not threatening. There's no shame in losing a fair fight. There is every shame. His mandibles clicked rapidly. I am Kronar. We are warriors. We do not lose to softskins who cannot even survive our planet's gravity. Sarah understood then what Thex had meant about respect and resentment walking together. Vortan hadn't come here to attack her, at least not primarily. He'd come here because he was confused. His entire worldview said that size and strength determined the outcome of combat. She'd violated that law of nature as he understood it. You didn't lose because you're weak, Sarah said carefully. You lost because you expected me to be. Explain. It wasn't a request. Sarah thought about how to make this make sense to someone who'd never questioned their physical dominance. On Earth, humans aren't the biggest predators. We're not the fastest or the strongest or the most armored. We evolved alongside creatures that could kill us easily. Big cats, bears, crocodiles, even some of our primate cousins. We survived by being smart and adaptable. We learned to make tools, to work together, to find weaknesses in things much larger than us. This is why you fight strangely. You attack joints and soft tissue instead of meeting strength with strength. We attack intelligently. We study our opponents, learn their vulnerabilities, and exploit them. That's not strange to us. That's survival. Sarah gestured at her own body. Look at me, Vertan. I weigh 130 pounds. You weigh over 500. If I tried to fight you the way you fight other Kronars, I'd lose every time. So I fight you differently. Vortan's forearms flexed, processing this information. On my world, such tactics would be considered dishonorable. A warrior faces their enemy directly. And on my world, a warrior uses every advantage available to protect themselves and others. There's no honor in dying because you are too proud to adapt. Sarah took a breath. I didn't humiliate you, Vortan. I fought you with the skills I have. If that feels like humiliation, maybe that's because you assumed you'd already won before the fight even started. The silence stretched between them. Sarah could hear the station's life support systems humming, the distant sounds of training from other decks, her own heartbeat steady in her ears. Vortan could charge her right now, and in this confined space she'd have seconds to react. She'd been training for those seconds, but she'd prefer not to use that training again. Finally, Vortan's mandibles clicked in a pattern Sarah had learned meant thoughtful consideration. Shrek says you train with him privately. He does not usually accept students outside his assigned classes. He's interested in human combat systems. We're learning from each other. I wish to learn as well. Sarah blinked. Of all the things she'd expected Vortan to say, that wasn't on the list. You want me to train you. I want Shrek to train me as he trains you, to teach me to fight beings faster than myself. Vortan's voice took on a tone Sarah hadn't heard before, something almost like respect. If humans can defeat Kronars despite being smaller and weaker, then Kronars can learn to defeat beings faster and more agile. This makes us better warriors. Sarah felt something shift in her understanding of Vortan. He wasn't a bully for bullying's sake. He was a warrior from a culture that valued strength, confronted with evidence that his definition of strength was incomplete. He'd processed that information the only way he knew how, through combat. And when combat proved her point, he'd come to the logical conclusion. I'll talk to Shrek, Sarah said, but you need to understand something. Human combat training isn't about dominance displays. It's about discipline, control, and knowing when not to fight as much as when to fight. You showed control when you fought me. You could have damaged me permanently, but you chose not to. Bartan's posture shifted slightly, becoming less aggressive. This is also a kind of strength, yes? Yes. Then I will learn this strength as well. Bartan moved toward the door, then paused. The marks on your door. I will remove them and ensure no others appear. You have earned your place here. He left before Sarah could respond. She stood in the dim storage area processing what had just happened. She'd gone from Vortan's target to his. What? Not friend, exactly. Kronars didn't make friends easily across species, but something like a respected rival, maybe. Someone worth learning from rather than dominating. Kessa was waiting when Sarah returned to their quarters, her scales bright with barely contained excitement. Is it true? Did Vortan come to apologize? Not exactly apologize, more like acknowledge that his assumptions were wrong. Sarah dropped onto her bunk. He wants to train with Shrek. Kronars do not ask other species for combat training. They believe their own methods are superior. Kessa's tongue flicked rapidly. You have changed something fundamental, Sarah. The way our year group views humans has shifted. Over the next weeks, Sarah noticed the change Kessa had mentioned. Cadets who'd ignored her before nodded in corridors. Their test scores and tactical exercises were suddenly being reviewed by senior staff with interest rather than skepticism. When she entered a room, conversations didn't stop. They continued, now including her rather than excluding her. Vortan kept his word about the training. Shrek, intrigued by the possibility of teaching a Kronar to fight against faster opponents, accepted him as a student. Sarah found herself in an unlikely training partnership, teaching Vortan and several other Kronars how to recognize and counter speed-based tactics. The sessions were brutal. Kronars were not patient learners, and they struggled with concepts like restraint and precision striking. But they were dedicated, and slowly they began to understand what Sarah had been trying to explain. One afternoon, 3 months after their first fight, Sarah was drilling with Vortan while Shrek observed. They were practicing defensive techniques against multiple attackers. Ironic, given that was how their conflict had started. Vortan had improved significantly. His reaction time still slower than Sarah's, but his positioning much better. He'd learned to predict where she'd move, rather than trying to track where she was. "Good," Shrek called out. "Vortan, you are learning to think 3 moves ahead, instead of reacting to the current move. This is progress." Vortan's mandibles clicked in satisfaction. He helped Sarah to her feet after the drill ended. "You are a skilled teacher, Chen, for a soft skin." Sarah grinned. Coming from Vortan, that was practically a declaration of friendship. "You're not a bad student for someone who outweighs me by 400 pounds. 385, Vortan corrected. "I have been on the human diet you suggested." "Lower mass means faster movement." Sarah stared. "You're dieting to be more competitive with humans?" "I am adapting, as you said humans do. My people will need to adapt as well if we are to fight alongside your species effectively." Vortan tilted his head. "The coalition is changing, Chen. More human ships join the fleet every month. More human tactics are being adopted by command staff. If Kronars wish to remain relevant as warriors, we must understand what makes humans effective." It was a perspective shift Sarah hadn't expected. She'd been so focused on proving herself that she hadn't considered what her presence meant for the larger coalition. Humans weren't just another species joining an established military structure. They were bringing new ideas, new methods, new ways of thinking about warfare. And species like the Kronars, who'd built their entire culture around one definition of strength, were being forced to expand that definition or risk becoming obsolete. Commander Thex summoned Sarah to his office again near the end of the term. She'd grown used to these meetings. Thex had taken a personal interest in tracking her progress and often called her in to discuss tactical theory or human military history. "Sit, Cadet Chen. I have news." Sarah sat, wondering what this was about. Her grades were excellent, her combat scores had improved significantly, and she'd even placed in the top 10 for tactical exercises last month. "The Coalition High Command has reviewed the footage of your fight with Vortan," Thex said. "They have also reviewed your subsequent training logs and the performance improvements in the cadets you've been teaching." Sarah's stomach clenched. "Sir, they are impressed. Very impressed." Thex opened a holographic display showing what looked like official military documents. "You have been selected for the Advanced Combat Instructor Program. Upon graduation, you will be assigned to train coalition forces in human combat techniques." Sarah couldn't speak. The Advanced Combat Instructor Program was one of the most prestigious positions in the coalition military. Only the top 0.01% of cadets ever received that assignment, and she'd never heard of a human being selected. "Sir, I'm honored, but I'm only in my first year." "Surely there are more qualified candidates." "There are candidates with more experience," Thex interrupted. "There are none with your unique combination of skills, teaching ability, and cross-species effectiveness. You have demonstrated that human combat methods can overcome significant physical disadvantages. More importantly, you have demonstrated that these methods can be taught to other species." He pulled up another document. "Cadet Vortan has also been selected for the program. His application specifically requested assignment to work with you. He believes Kronars need to understand human combat philosophy, and he wants to be the bridge between our species." Sarah thought about the Kronar who'd terrorized her for weeks, who'd challenged her to a fight expecting an easy victory, who'd found himself on the mat wondering how everything he knew was wrong. And she thought about the warrior he'd become, someone humble enough to recognize his limitations and dedicated enough to overcome them. "When do we start?" Sarah asked. "After graduation. You have 3 more years to complete your standard combat training and tactical certification." Thex's mandibles clicked, and what Sarah had learned was Gestian amusement. But I suspect those 3 years will pass quickly. You have already changed how this academy views combat. Imagine what you will do with an entire fleet at your disposal. Sarah left the office with her mind racing. She'd come to the academy expecting to spend 4 years proving that humans deserved a place in the coalition military. Instead, she'd spent 4 months proving that humans had something unique to offer. A perspective on warfare that didn't rely on size or strength, but on intelligence, adaptability, and precise application of force. That night, Sarah stood at the viewport in her quarters, looking out at the stars. Somewhere out there were human colonies, Earth ships, soldiers who'd never doubted humanity's place among the stars. They didn't know about the cadet who'd been marked as weak, who'd been challenged and pushed, who'd fought back and won not just a fight but hearts and minds. Her grandmother had been right. Don't give them what they expect. If they expect weakness, show strength. If they expect aggression, show patience. If they expect surrender, show steel. Sarah had shown them all of that and more. She'd shown them what humans were capable of when they chose to be dangerous. She'd shown them that restraint wasn't weakness but strength under control. And she'd shown them that the smallest warrior in the room could be the most dangerous one if they were smart enough, fast enough, and determined enough. The door chimed. Kessa entered, followed by Vortan and several other cadets from their training group, Kronars, Delphians, even a Gestian. They were carrying what looked like ceremonial weapons from their respective cultures. "We heard about your selection," Kessa said, her scales bright with pride. "This is a great honor." "Among my people," Vortan said, "when a warrior achieves a significant victory, their comrades present weapons from our armory to honor their skill." He held out a ceremonial blade, wickedly sharp and inscribed with Kronar script. "You have earned this, Chen. You defeated me, not with strength, but with something my people are only beginning to understand. We wish to honor that achievement." One by one, the other cadets presented their weapons. A Delphian shock staff, a Gestian wingblade, items that represented their species' martial traditions. Sarah accepted each one, feeling the weight of what they represented. These weren't just weapons. They were symbols of acceptance, respect, acknowledgement that humans belonged here as equals. "Thank you," Sarah managed. "All of you. But I didn't do this alone. Vertan, you pushed me to be better than I thought I could be. Kessa, you supported me when everyone else doubted. Shrek taught me how to turn my limitations into advantages. Every one of you helped make this possible." "You are too modest," Vorden said. "You stood in a circle against 2 Kronars and refused to break. You showed us what human warriors are capable of. That was not our achievement. It was yours." Sarah looked at the weapons, at the cadets who'd once seen her as weak, at the stars beyond the viewport. She thought about 4 seconds that had changed everything. About precision strikes placed faster than her opponent could track. About a fight she'd won by refusing to give up ground. And she realized that her grandmother had been right about something else too. The key wasn't just showing them what humans could do. It was showing them what humans chose to do, and teaching them to choose the same way. "Then let's make sure every warrior in the coalition knows what we're capable of," Sarah said. "All of us, together." The cadets raised their weapons in salute, dozens of different species, using dozens of different gestures, all honoring the same principle. Strength wasn't about size or armor or natural weapons. Strength was about knowing your capabilities, controlling them with discipline, and using them with precision and purpose. It was about being dangerous enough that you never had to prove it, and skilled enough that when you did, it only took 4 seconds. Years later, when historians documented humanity's integration into the Galactic Coalition, they would point to many factors: the technological exchange, the cultural ambassadors, the political negotiations. But military analysts always came back to one moment: the day a human cadet stood in a training circle against a warrior species that had conquered worlds and showed them that size wasn't everything. Sarah Chen's 4 seconds in that circle didn't just win a fight. They changed how an entire galaxy thought about warfare, about humans, and about what it meant to be strong. And it all started because someone made the mistake of thinking that soft skin meant a soft spirit, that restraint meant cowardice, that refusing to fight meant unable to fight. Vortan never made that mistake again. Neither did anyone else who saw the footage, studied the techniques, or learned from the instructors that Sarah trained. The galaxy had learned its lesson. Humans don't start fights, but they sure know how to finish them.